This is Tyler, your antisocial critic and the host of the AntiSocial Network, your number one source for anachronistic conversations online. Come join us each week to hear opinions from some of the best voices discussing entertainment, politics, religion, and modern life on the internet today, most of which you've never heard of, but I have. This week on AntiSocial Theology, we're joined by Ginger, the host of the Fighting the Void podcast. I don't know if that's the full intro that I should give, but what is there anything else you do online besides your podcast, or how would you describe yourself?
That is the main thing I do online. So as far as my online life goes, that works just fine and dandy.
Yeah, as far as I can tell, you have an actual life and a productive social situation outside of YouTube, which most YouTubers don't seem to have. So the people like me, we just tend to, what do you do? Oh, well, I have a website and a blog, and I do like 3 podcasts, and it's like you fill up your time because you got nothing to do. But if
yeah, I actually have a full-time day job, and a wife and 6 kids.
Oh man.
and a few hobbies that have nothing to do with the internet. So yeah, we have like a side farm that we work on. So yeah.
So yeah,
I don't spend that much time in front of the computer.
Well, yeah, full-time life. That's the way it should be, unless you're me, in which case this is your profession, quote unquote. But
well, as you say, that's a lot of YouTubers, and to succeed as a YouTuber, that's kind of what you need to do.
Yeah, but it gets depressing though, because there's a lot of YouTubers who that's their primary goal in life. Like there's a really, I remember when I talked to Paul Vanderklay, I pulled up a really depressing statistic that there's more young people now that want to be YouTubers than astronauts, and that messes you up.
That, yes, that's a little depressing, to be honest, especially since when I grew up, I literally wanted to be an astronaut. That was my dream for years.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that'll change now that Elon Musk is revolutionizing everything and just subsidizing an entire space program. But
dude, did you see the pictures of the 2 spaceship?
I did.
Starship.
Yeah.
Things that he put out there. I'm like, this thing is straight out of a 1950s.
Yeah.
Book on the future of spaceflight.
I've seen a lot of those Werner von Braun documentaries where he's pitching his super crazy ideas for what he wants the space program to be like. Oh, we're gonna make a single stage rocket that takes off. It's 500 feet tall, and it can fit an entire multiple people inside it, and it'll land wholly on the moon, take off, and then land again on the Earth. And NASA's like, no.
That's going to be really hard and take a lot of money. And they were right. They were right, because yeah, I've seen the same conceptual drawings and everything. I actually, summer of 2019, I was at the Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville, and that was part of one of their exhibits with stuff on that. And I'm like,
I was actually just down at
that they were serious about pursuing this idea.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of which, I took a vacation to Orlando in December, and we just so happened to go to the Kennedy Space Center, and it happened to be on the day I did not know this going into it. It happened to be the day they were launching one of the Falcon 9s. So I get there 20 minutes before the launch, and they're like, "Oh, are you here for the launch?" I'm like, "The what?" It's like, "Oh, we're shooting off a Falcon 9. I'm like, "You shoot things off Cape Kennedy still?" I was completely taken aback, and then lo and behold, I get to see one of Elon Musk's rockets get shot off. So
that is awesome.
It wasn't an important mission, one of the experiment. It was just, I think it was just a refueling stop for the ISS. But dang, if you've never seen a rocket go off, it's one of those once in a lifetime things. And unfortunately, I think I probably spent an entire lifetime of good fortune in that event. So I'm expecting nothing but pestilence and failure for the next decade. So.
Well, I hope it was worth it.
So I guess it's hey, they say if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. But I think God just gave me my one good moment, and now I'm it's all downhill from there, Tyler. Just pack it in. But
well, let's hope let's hope there's 1 or 2 more good things in store for you. Because as cool as that would be, I'm not sure it's gonna stack up. Just saying.
Anyway,
Unless you're a huge Musk fanboy. I don't know.
I do love me some Musk. I don't know if I call myself a fanboy. I loved his meme review segment. I will happily retweet every time I see him, but that's about the extent of it.
Fair enough.
Although going to the Kennedy Space Center definitely made me a NASA not a truther, but they were talking up the whole NASA's planned Mars mission, and it's like, oh, we're planning to go. We have our rocket stage planned, and they showed a design and they showed what it was going to look like, and I'm like, this is 20 years behind what Elon Musk is doing. Like, what are you doing at this point? Why are you going to try?
Literally, and you say 20 years behind. That's both true in a design sense, and it's true in a, let's face it, schedule sense, because the Orion, which is the rocket you're talking about, was already supposed to be very close to actually sending stuff out there by now.
It should have been done like a decade ago.
We are supposed to be well into actually putting people into space with this thing already, and I don't think they've even gotten a functional test flight with the capsule off the ground.
Oh my gosh! Like freaking Lockheed Electra and Boeing are gonna have their rockets going before NASA does, and I just sat there, like they had like a mock-up of the Orion capsule at the Space Center, and I'm like, I've never felt more conspiratorial in my entire life, because I can tell you this thing right in front of me does not exist. It's never going to exist. No. There's not going to be
It does not exist, and will it ever exist? Honestly, at this point, I don't care, because NASA has become just it's a dinosaur.
Yeah.
It's just become another big, bloated, bureaucratic institution that's more interested in talking about climate change than it is in actually fulfilling its freaking mission.
I mean, we all remember during the Obama administration how NASA became like their primary job was Muslim outreach. So, like,
I do remember that, and I was like, "What, are there like Muslims on Mars or something that we don't know about?" Because we should be reaching out to them because I want to go to Mars. I really don't care what your motivation is at this point. I grew up wanting to literally be the first man on Mars, and I'm like, but we can't even get a thing. Dang it!
You know that would
out there, which is cool.
That would fulfill my other great prophecy of life. That is when people always talk about how like the aliens are going to come down in a few years and they're going to introduce themselves and it's going to completely wreck the human religious systems. And I'm just sitting here like, the moment the aliens come down, they're going to be like nothing like you could expect, or they're going to be like, or like an Earth like religion. Like they're gonna come out of the rocket, introduce themselves in the world and be like, "Shalom, my fellow. Where's everyone else? I don't." They're gonna be like they're all gonna be like super Orthodox Jewish, or they're all gonna be Muslim, and we're gonna have to deal with that. I'm like, oh my gosh, what the?
or they're gonna be all, "Do you have a moment to talk about your Lord and Savior Zargon?" Which would be awesome.
And then the second aliens are gonna be like, "Oh wait, the Space Mormons got to you first? Okay, we don't talk to them, but they go out to like alien planets, introduce themselves, and they just kind of those guys."
I would actually love to see that, but people that talk about that, they're like, it's gonna wreck our religious system, don't understand that back in ye old ancient, supposedly primitive, dark, ignorant medieval times, there were philosophers and theologians actually talking about, so what do we do if we ever find aliens? Actual topic of discussion. I don't know that they reached any hard conclusions. I don't think they did. I think it was just a fun topic of discussion. But they're like, what if there's other things out there, the stars out there, and well, what do we do with that? So we act like we're all smart and everything, and just came up with this. I was like, aha, take that, you religious people. You'll never figure this one out. Like, yeah, they were actually talking about it centuries ago, jackwagon.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things that kind of, I mean, we can one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was Catholicism versus Protestantism, just because I know that's something that you talk about a lot. But I think that's definitely a side effect of the fundamentalist evangelical Christianity becoming as prominent as in America, is that so many Americans, the only version of Christianity they're used to is the most. I mean, I'm an evangelical myself, but there's a very dumbed down version of it that a lot of people think is the only version of Christianity, and they think
700 clubs.
Yeah, exactly.
700 club Christianity.
Yeah, exactly. It's just that version of it, and that's the version like the online atheists are always going off about. It's like, oh, Christianity, yada yada, it does all this dumb stuff. It's like the one strain of it does, the probably the most pernicious and common strain, but it's not the only one. And anyone who takes this stuff seriously can go in back and like a little bit and find plentiful examples of that. I mean, that's something Lewis talks about in God in the Dock, is that you go back 1,000 years, and they basically knew everything we knew about the world. They just didn't entirely know how it fits together in the way we do. I mean,
they weren't people back in the olden days. They weren't stupid.
We'd like to think they were stupid, but
yeah, exactly. Even this whole idea that everybody thought the world was flat. I'm like, yeah, no, they didn't.
Have you read Dante? No.
Well, and just any old statue or image of a king showing his domination of the world, or of Jesus, like old statues of infant Jesus of Prague and everything. He'd be holding a globe. He's holding a sphere. If everybody thought the world was flat, he would have been holding a dinner plate.
Oh my gosh!
Might there well have been, plenty of the peasantry that thought the world was flat? Maybe. Anyone who was educated knew that it wasn't. And let's be honest, as far as the peasantry, did it really help them one way or another to know that the Earth was round regardless? Let's be honest, no. And even if they did, again, they probably could have had that misconception fixed by going, "Hey, Father, why is Jesus holding a ball? Oh, well, that's the world. But I thought it was flat. It's not. Oh, cool."
I don't know. Maybe there were like surf flat earthers back in the day. I mean, I don't know.
There might have been. I don't know. I think we are uniquely. I think, given the amount of knowledge available to us, we are actually uniquely ignorant in the modern world.
Yeah, I mean, we everyone could be a doctorate right now with the amount of info on the internet right now, and they're not. So all they just do is they go to the one website that makes them feel, that confirms all of their most virulent conspiracy theories, and just
or they're looking at all the Instagram influencers, by which I mean the girls prostituting themselves.
Well, and that's not new. I mean, I one of my people I follow on Twitter, Deadly River Neva, found an image of a Greek pot from I don't remember what it was, but it showed a woman carrying a very, very large phallus. So I mean people don't change.
Nothing new.
There's nothing new under the sun.
No, I mean look at Samson. Let's face it, Samson was not a paragon of virtue by any means whatsoever. He clearly enjoyed the ladies a lot. One in particular that he just apparently he enjoyed so much. He's like, yeah, I guess he keeps falling for it. Tell me how to rob you of your strength. Well, I'm going to tell you a couple of lies, and then guys are going to show up and try to do what I said, but I'm totally not going to connect the dots because guys, have you seen this?
I mean, stories like that always have like a mythological edge, but that guy must have been a lug, like straight over his head, every single thing.
He was just in a little too deep.
All the blood was going to his muscles, not to the head.
Yeah. Well, not the proper head at any rate. He was definitely not thinking up here.
Oh my gosh. So, I don't know how to transition out of that, but you talked about a lot of...
So there you go.
you talked a lot of the line about kind of your intellectual journey, but what is it? Could you give us a summary of where you started and kind of how you ended up where you are now, where you're Catholic YouTuber?
Okay, well, let's see here. Hold on, I'm getting visited by one of my little ones.
Oh.
What do you need, Munchkin? Hey, what are you doing?
Hello.
Are you going to bed, honey? Well, you should be. It's your time to go to bed. You should actually be in bed, as a matter of fact. Yeah, I know, it's a bummer. All right, hey, get to bed, little one. Love you. That happens a lot, actually.
Yeah, I was listening to a couple of your podcasts while I was driving this week, and that happened at least twice. So
Yeah, it's usually her or her older sister.
I mean, hey,
Like the next oldest.
There are much worse problems than that to have in the world, but
I am totally okay with that being the occasional problem. But back to actually answering the question, I guess. Well, I was raised. I say generally speaking Christian Reformed. My parents weren't hardcore church goers by any means. They were the type of people that, you went to Sunday school and everything, and you went most weeks, but you kind of took summers off for reasons. I don't understand why, but we did. So definitely raised Christian, but definitely not hardcore. My dad's side of the family was very hardcore Christian Reformed and everything, very Calvinist. For those who don't know what Christian Reformed is, it's one of the branches of Calvinism.
Basically, 2 or 3 steps below, like, unironic Puritan, essentially.
Yes, and they have a lot of that. In fact, they are sort of for those who remember the Dana Carvey's church lady on SNL, they were, let's just say, I related to that character a lot. And because I knew people that were basically that character. It wasn't that was not a complete caricature. Anyway, so that's more or less what I grew up with. I did a brief stint as an atheist in high school. It didn't last long. It eventually got to, after a little while, I thought I was kind of smart and really thought you didn't really need God, but I'm like, it doesn't really work though without him. So I guess I'm not an atheist anymore. And flirted a little bit with some friends and I who are basically slowly becoming a small cult, even though I didn't realize it at the time.
Oops.
Yeah, looking back on it, it's like, that was weird. And, we can go into that if you want, but that kind of came and went after a little bit.
It feels like a tangent for later, but...
it was an interesting tangent, that's for sure. But then I went into the Navy, and for the most part during the Navy, I kind of went back and forth in my faith. Attended a non-denominational church for a little bit and everything, and the people there were great and everything. They were fantastic. Had a lot of really great conversations with them, and over time, I kind of became what I now describe as a Christian-flavored agnostic, which is you have a lot of basic beliefs and everything that, whether you realize it or not, are grounded in Christianity, and you may even still kind of call yourself a Christian, but it doesn't really affect much of how you live. You don't go to church, you don't read the Bible, you don't really do anything that would identify you as a Christian. You just have some basic moral beliefs and everything that are still kind of attached to it, but not really. It's very, 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 very vague Christianity, and I think that describes a lot of people in America today.
Yeah.
A lot of people who would say they're Christian are they live life more as an agnostic that still believes in being a good person. So that's kind of where I was for a very long time, for many years actually. And then my brother, he goes and becomes Catholic. I'm like, where did this come from? that's interesting. And so we would come home, and we would basically, every time I would come home on leave from the Navy, we would spend hours, well into the night, debating philosophy and theology. It'd get pretty heated from time to time, and not the typical things that a Protestant would be debating with a Catholic. Like, I didn't debate a lot of stuff about Mary or anything like that. I did debate things like, male-only priesthood. I did debate a lot on the Eucharist, the whole idea that there would be one church that Christ intended. I debated a lot of that sort of thing, but not a lot of the more typical doctrinal issues that Protestants tend to have with Catholics. Mary didn't bother me in one way or another. I was just like, well, it's either true or it isn't. So I didn't have a lot of the, I guess, baggage that comes with being, frankly, a good Protestant. And I don't mean that unironically. I mean, like, a good Protestant is going to have issues here, and I understand that. So, but slowly kind of wore me down a little bit. I'm like, okay, sort of just listening to the arguments and everything. I got about this close, where I'm like, okay, I get why the church teaches what she teaches on the Eucharist. I get confession, even from a purely secular standpoint. I was like, at a bare minimum, they function as totally free shrinks. Even from a secular standpoint, you have a free psychiatrist to go to. So I was like, oh, okay. Even from that perspective, I get it. I got a lot of the structure and everything. I just wasn't ready to sort of pull the trigger and that went on for a couple of years, or I wasn't quite ready to go there. I was like, no, I've got to read more and everything. I've got to study more. I want to really know if I'm going to sign on the dotted line here. I got to know what I'm getting myself into. So I studied a lot, and I felt that way about any church. I was like, I'm not joining any church unless I can sign on the dotted line and say, I believe everything you guys teach. Because otherwise I'm wasting their time and mine. I'll go to another church and learn what they have to say, and that's cool. And I was for a while. My now wife, we were just dating at the time. We were going to a local Wesleyan church, and and going through there. And again, I enjoyed the people and everything, and all of that jazz. And they had a pretty good, like Christianity 101 program that you or some of your viewers might be familiar with, called Alpha. They were doing that at the time, and I thought that was really cool. And it did help sort of generate a more than an intellectual desire for faith, actually more of a actually engaged the heart a little bit. I was like, I kind of envy the people who have a very simple faith. I'm not really wired that way, but I kind of envy the people that are. That, I don't know, I did find that helpful in some way, like just reminding me that it's not meant to be all up here. Up here is good, but if it's not here too, it's kind of pointless. And then it's just an intellectual exercise. But then and my wife, while we were dating, she was very not down with me looking into Catholicism at all. She very much did not like it. And part of that was the fact that she was raised Catholic. But again, her parents were very nominally Catholic, the way mine were nominally Protestant. And they stopped going altogether when she was very young. So all she had as far as real knowledge and experience was just, anything negative that her parents might have said, essentially. And negativity that you just kind of absorb from the culture. Because, obviously America's a very Protestant country, and we live in a very, very Protestant area. And of course, pop culture is not very friendly towards Catholics. So, you just absorb a certain amount of baggage regardless. And so she definitely had that, until all of a sudden she she completely flipped. She had a couple of different experiences. One was just being in a Catholic bookstore that was local, and just seeing all the people in there, hearing some of the conversations, and it kind of cracked open the door a little bit. And she had, while reading a catechism apologetics type book, she actually had something bordering on a mystical experience, apparently, while she was in her apartment. And before I knew it, she was signing up for rite of Christian initiation for adults at the parish that was closest to her. I'm like, huh, no kidding. Well, you know what? I guess I better sign up too, because let's face it, I've just been sitting on the fence here. It's time to go get it straight from the horse's mouth. And, well, that was many years ago now. That was actually coming up on 17 years this Easter. And, well, haven't looked back since.
Well, there you go. You was converted.
I don't know how short that was, but
he was converted by his wife. There, beginning and end of the story. Beginning and end of the story.
There's a very short version.
I mean, I know that you'll meet a lot of people that are that way. It's like, oh, why did you start going to the church? Well, it's because the wife wouldn't stop nagging, and you know what I mean. But obviously, that's not. I mean, it's not the case for you, but that's the funny way to be smug about it. But
oh, yeah, I mean, there are definitely, it still happens where you get people converting for the girl.
Oh yeah, I was that guy in high school. I remember. I was never an atheist at any point outside of maybe a couple like weekends, but I remember the first church I ever went to willingly. I was like, wow, there are a lot of cute girls at this church. I should go here. So there was no intellectual exercise involved at the time, but I definitely didn't start developing any sort of intellectual muscles until after I left that church, because you know at some point you just need to be alone with God and just kind of actually think about stuff on its own terms, and that's what really draws you into it more than anything else. But although,
absolutely,
I mean I've had a weird journey, because a lot, and the longer I go on, the more dissociated of it I get, just in terms of my attachment to any sort of earthly, any individual church as it is. I mean, I've been to just about every kind of church there is. I mean, I grew up essentially kind of a weird combination of Baptist, Methodist, Lutheran, non-denominational, and whatever else you want to just throw in, like the generic fundamentalist Protestant camp. My grandparents were all very, very traditional, and that's where I got my basis, was just the fact that my grandparents would actually make me sit down and read the stuff with them at night, and that kind of became my basis. And going forward, it took a very long time for me to get any sort of bearing as to what any of it actually meant. And now, as an adult, it got even worse, because I realized, like, oh gosh, it's all so labyrinthian. I mean, I briefly got brought into like a Calvinist group of friends, and they're super intense. And I had a bunch of Mormon friends in high school, and they tried to get me to go into their group. And I've been to mass a couple of times. And I mean, every time I go to one, I'm always impressed by something, and I'm always off-put by something else. So it ends up being just weird sort of back and forth. I call it spiritual whiplash, where you get something out of the experience, but then something just kind of leaves you like an existential crisis as you're walking out. Like, I remember I went to the Mormon Holy Land once to visit a friend, saw the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, and I was so like taken aback by it. I was like, this is some of the most beautiful stuff I've ever heard in my life. Maybe there's something to this. Then they took me across the street, explained to me what's in the Book of Mormon, and I was like, well, that went away fast.
And well, you guys got some good music though.
Yeah, it's like nothing will make you question your faith more than watching like all of that experience drained in an hour flat, like that. And I've had that a couple of times. I had the same experience when I went to the Creation Museum in Kentucky, where it's like, well, that was probably even a little bit harder, because there wasn't as much I didn't find much that was like, there was no adoration involved with it. It was just all these like signs about how scientifically how could the Ark have been real, and I'm like, okay, this is just this is a snake sucking its own tail level of theology here, but and there was a lot of fun stuff. But I always bring up the seeing the 3D T-Rex swallowing a watermelon in the Garden of Eden. I'm just like, wow, I feel nothing watching this at all except like dumb.
It's like, just because you put those images together doesn't mean they actually go together.
Yeah, and I've read a couple of the books that I bought a couple of the books they had in their gift shop just so I could understand them, and I was just reading them like, oh my gosh, it's like this is like nothing. And one of the things I do genuinely appreciate about Catholicism is that they do have their theology down, and it's a lot deeper than you will get from your average like fundamentalist pastor who just writes his own book and gives it to his flock, being like, read this book and it'll explain everything. And it's like, okay, it's basically the groundwork for how to follow Christ is good, but all the explanation stuff is awful. Like, it's genuinely awful. And I don't like to be mean, because that's you're punching down on people they're trying to do their best, but they're just not equipped to fight in that arena.
You know, it is interesting that you bring that up, because one of the things I've noticed is that evangelical Protestant world is starting to develop a little bit more intellectual depth. And as it does so, frankly, it's starting to sound more Catholic. It's actually getting, it's just the philosophical considerations and everything that are going into trying to parse out not just explaining scripture, but actually how to live it out and justifications for this or that, the other thing. It's actually like, guys are starting to sound like us.
I'm wondering if that's just where the voices are coming from, though, because I'm thinking about like the people that are genuinely causing waves in intellectual Protestantism. It's people like Jonathan Pageau and Jordan Peterson, and it's people that probably get most of their stuff from doctrine Catholicism to some degree, or doctrine, even just Anglicanism. And Anglicanism is basically just Catholic light. So I would imagine it's probably just that idea is just kind of bleeding back in just because of where these ideas are coming from.
That's precisely true. I mean, they're starting to actually delve into historical sources a lot more, as opposed to just taking a look at scripture and going, well, the plain sense of scripture says to me, and then they write their book and give it to the flock. Yeah,
it's like, we're going to add the ages of all the people together and come up with the exact age of the earth. I'm like, okay, whatever, but...
Yeah, it's like, on its face, and like, well, okay, I get why you do that. But you might want to consider the fact that, numbers had symbolic meanings for the ancient Hebrews.
Yeah.
These numbers may or may not be literal. It may be, they may have some sort of other symbolic meaning. I don't know, but it may be worth considering. It may be worth considering the fact that you're not getting this person literally lived for that long. It may just be, no, these are the highlight. These are the highlight people that they're getting. You're not getting necessarily every single individual in the genealogy. You're getting the most important people in the genealogy. That's also at least one possible way of looking at that. And I honestly have no idea what's current in biblical scholarship on that, nor am I overly concerned with it. Because actually, there's a book that I actually want to recommend to you and your viewers. It's called The Science of God by Gerard or Gerald Schroeder, whichever. Just look up Science of God. And the last name Schroeder, you'll get there. He has possibly the best possible explanation of how to square a literal interpretation of Genesis with modern science. And it's based entirely on relativity. And how space and time, it stretches, right? And
yeah.
The amount how fast you go affects how fast time goes for you, right? Well, so does the amount that space is stretching. That affects their perception of time as well. And I'm not going to do the explanation justice. You've got to go and check him out and read through it. But basically says, yes, from our perspective relative to the Big Bang, he says crunching the numbers and everything, roughly 15 billion years. I think the latest is like 13.8 or whatever, but when you're talking about that length of time, what's a billion or 2 years here and there, give or take. However, if you were standing at the origin point of the Big Bang, your perception of time would only be 6,000 years ish. The way he lays it out, it makes perfect sense and everything. I strongly encourage your viewers to go and just check that book out. It's incredibly interesting. It's well presented, and he goes into a lot of the math and everything, which I'm not equipped to follow, but I'm familiar with the concepts that he's talking about. So if you're familiar, basically, if you weren't confused by Interstellar, you'll be fine.
That makes a stunning amount of sense when you even just say it like that, like just the idea of like I mean I don't even know how to fully explain it back to you, but but yeah,
it's really good, and it really does a good job of explaining how it may well be that these two things are absolutely not incompatible at all, that a literal interpretation of Scripture meshes perfectly well with a literal interpretation of modern science. So yeah, definitely he goes into other things and everything within his book that are interesting but less convincing. Although one of the things that really blew my mind that I hadn't really considered before, how the closer you get to the speed of light, the slower time moves.
Yeah.
Right, relative to the rest of the universe. So at the speed of light, there is no time. It's like, whoa. I mean, you're right. That follows, but I don't even know how to wrap my head around that other than to say, yeah, I guess that follows.
Yeah, that's gonna keep me up at night for a little bit, but
yeah, that was just like, dude, I don't know where to go from there. It's like,
dude, yeah. That's like time doesn't exist when you're light.
And who knows? Maybe that's one of the reasons you can't get to the speed of light. You can't get a material object to the speed of light. Maybe that's part of why, because you're sort of busting into eternity somehow or another. But that's rampant speculation on my part.
Yeah, good grief. I don't even know where to go with that.
No, but and again, the just for fun, something that people can kind of keep in their back pocket to smack around an atheist with if they feel the desire. The person who came up with the Big Bang idea was a Catholic priest.
Yeah, I knew that.
Okay, yeah. In fact, for the benefit of the viewers, he's the one who explained the concept to Einstein.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, because Einstein, like most cosmologists, most physicists, most astronomers of his day, believed in a steady state universe. Just that it always was. That the universe, more or less as it exists today, was eternal. Stars live, they're born, they die, and everything. But the size of the universe doesn't change, and everything. Their universe always was. Well, and the idea that there was they didn't like the idea of an expanding universe because it meant there would be a beginning. And in fact, Einstein even originally inserted into his relativity equations a fudge factor called the cosmological constant, because he realized his equations were showing an expanding universe, and he couldn't accept it. So he literally came up with a fudge factor to insert in there to maintain his belief in a steady state universe. So screw you, objective science. He did later on take it out and declared it the greatest blunder of his life. But it was again a Catholic priest who was also a scientist who explained to Einstein how scientifically an expanding universe works.
Wow, good grief! I mean,
And if you doubt it, at the very least, you can prove that they knew each other because there are pictures of them walking and talking together.
Wow, I mean, I didn't know the meet and greet part, but good grief!
Oh yeah, yeah, oh yeah, they knew each other.
Well, I thought that scientist was like early. I assumed he was like early 19th century, but I guess nope. Okay, it must have been newer.
No, the Big Bang is still relatively recent scientific theory.
Okay, I actually thought it went back a little bit farther than the 20th century, but
nope, not at all. It is interesting how many of the things that we take for granted are actually recent developments.
Well, yeah, and science just moves so fast nowadays. It's
even, we take the idea of continental drift for granted, but when they first realized that it was happening, they had no idea why. There was a lot of debate about it. There were even serious scientists seriously asking, is the Earth expanding? As a way of explaining why they were getting farther apart.
That's an unsettling thought.
Yeah. And that wasn't that long ago.
Well, I mean, obviously everything's on the table when you're faced with something you don't know how to explain. I mean,
yep.
We're still trying to figure out what the frick that rock was that flew through the solar system 3 years ago. And
yeah, the cigar.
Yeah, there's still people who are like, it probably wasn't aliens, but it was definitely aliens. But
yeah, yep.
People are just.
I know, and I don't know much about it other than it was very oddly shaped, came from interstellar space, and it
got faster when it moved away from the sun. So.
Yeah, that's not normal.
Yeah.
That is not normal. Whatever was going on there was definitely something. I suppose they would explain it with, I don't know, sun heated it up and it released some sort of gases and stuff that acted as a propulsion.
That's one thing I've heard, but
that's the only thing I could think of that would explain that. Other than aliens.
Yeah, I mean the weird part of the alien idea is I don't know why it would be moving as slowly as it was. Like if you have the ability to go interstellar, I don't know why you'd make if that's just the limitation is that you have to make something that's designed to just take hundreds of thousands of years to travel from one solar system to the other, or possibly even longer than that. But I don't know why you would do that and then just not say hi to anyone there unless it's just a piece of wreckage, which is just
wreckage or a probe. But even then, when you're looking at that kind of the time involved, a probe doesn't really make sense because what are you going to wait? However long, at the very least, probably a couple dozen years for the signal to get back, so you can launch another 100,000-year trek out to what turns out to be a promising piece of rock. No, you're just going to go and hope you find some stuff along the way.
Exactly. It's why the alien theory is weird too. It's just like if it's aliens, you'd think they'd have intergalactic travel or some sort of ability to warp space so that they can go through without past speed of light without screwing up their time in the long run. But I mean, this obviously is entirely off the beaten track as far as discussions goes.
Quite.
But
Quite.
We both love space, so it's not that hard. But
yeah.
So. In terms of trying to figure out what the best way to transition more into the Catholic Protestant talk would be, just because there's a lot we could go into there.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the intellectual side of the faith? Is that something that you just kind of was it something you've discovered before you were Protestant, or while you were still Protestant, or was it still something that you kind of came into after your conversion? Was it because I know. But the thing that fascinates me about Catholicism is definitely the intellectual side. It's also the thing that somewhat alienates me from it, but it's definitely the thing that makes me think that there's something. I mean, I'm definitely the kind of like I want piecemeal from every kind of different denomination kind of state at the moment. But like, what does that mean to you?
I would say I am that one person that actually was argued and read his way into the faith. They often say that doesn't really happen. I'm like, well, no, I'm proof that it does. Because, I mean, what got me to that right to the edge was arguing with my brother and reading a lot of books. So I would definitely say, while I was still technically Protestant, uh, I was definitely discovering the intellectual side of Catholicism, and it was some of the intellectual heavyweights that made the arguments and everything that made it possible to make the jump. A lot of your viewers will probably be aware of G.K. Chesterton.
Yes.
His work was instrumental. And one, just bringing me back to a more solid Christianity in general. Because reading through his book Orthodoxy, it was just phenomenal. It goes into some of the things that really make Christianity unique amongst any other world religion. And it got me thinking, too, about some of the things that make Catholicism unique. And one of them is perhaps best put out by, I think it was, I can't remember his name. It was the philosophy teacher for, I think, Edith Stein, who was a Jewish convert to Catholicism who died at a concentration camp during World War II. She was big. She was a heavyweight philosopher in her own right, but I think it was her professor who said, it's like, if any religion is true, it's Catholicism, because they're the only ones that are in the business of making saints. And I'm like, that's interesting. And Chesterton talks about some of that too in Orthodoxy, how it kind of sets it apart. And the saints are, and of course, for those who don't know, when a Catholic uses the term saints, we're not using it in the generic believer sense that you'll find in Paul's letters and everything in the New Testament. It's just, when we say saints, we mean people that we say, saints mean person that's in heaven. That's the simplest definition of, if a Catholic says saint, that's what they mean. I lost my train of thought.
Saint is a person who's in heaven.
Yeah. What it was, and it's not that the saints are any one particular kind of person either. It's one of the most interesting things. There's saints who are nuns and monks, of course. There's saints who are martyrs, of course. There are also saints who are scientists. There are saints who are politicians. There are saints who are kings, lawyers, regular moms and dads, all walks of life, rich, poor, everything in between. It's honestly, if I may use modern terminology, it's incredibly inclusive. People of every race from every part of the globe. There is probably a saint representing them in heaven that the church officially identifies as, yep, that person is definitely in heaven. Which, that's a whole process in and of itself. It definitely is not just we pick you. There's a big, long, sometimes hundreds of years process involved there. Usually it moves quicker than that, but not always. There's people that have been that have been like partway through the process for literally centuries. Call it a cold case.
Are they getting? I've heard that they're going to try to get sainthood for Chesterton. Have you heard about that?
That has been tossed around a little bit. The last I heard was the local bishop kind of shut it down, which annoys me to no end, because, I mean, for one, the guy was incredibly wise. If I don't care if you're Protestant, Catholic, if you're atheist, if you're watching this, literally, as soon as you're done watching it, go find a work by Chesterton. I don't care which one. Go find one. Well, maybe not Utopia of Usurers. That's far too specific. It's far too specific to his time.
You can get all the ebooks on Kindle for $1. So
exactly, get them. Start reading them. I don't, again, other than Utopia View series, because you got to know too much about the specific context to understand that one. But just about anything else, pick it up, read it. Not only is it just wonderful, whimsical writing to just kind of kick back and enjoy, it also has a lot of deep thought, and his essays talking about where he sees certain trends developing. You would think he was writing today.
Yeah.
Literally. In fact, there's a Chesterton account on Twitter that just regularly puts out quotes from him, and they could have been written by your favorite political pundit today. They are 100% on the mark, and he was writing this 100 years ago in England. So, yeah, he was incredibly wise, darn near a prophet, and I've never heard anyone doubt his holiness for so much as a nanosecond. Yeah, he took a sweet time becoming Catholic. He grew up Unitarian, and mostly Unitarian, and he actually says he was a flat-out socialist for a while. Then he kind of joined his wife and became Anglican, and for years, like literally years, he kind of was right on the edge of becoming Catholic and everything, but as so often happens, he didn't want to because he was afraid of how it would affect things with his wife. But eventually he finally made the point, like orthodoxy I mentioned. He actually wrote that something like 14 years before he became Catholic.
Wow, I didn't know that.
You would never know that to read it. You would swear he was a very devout Catholic at the time. But then you got to remember, Anglicans 100 years ago weren't Anglicans now.
Yeah, essentially they were just, like I said, Catholic light. So.
Yeah, exactly. They were much, much closer in many ways to Catholicism than the modern Anglican is, which is of course why a lot of Anglicans have actually crossed over and become Catholic, because they're like, well, we were supposed to be holding the line same as everything else, and we sold ourselves as part of the timeless faith founded by Christ and everything. Just, it was never meant to be, just with the idea that it was never meant to be centralized in Rome, where there would be local heads of kind of an Eastern Orthodox model is kind of what a lot of high church Anglicans were going with, that they just kind of saw where Canterbury kept leading them, and they're like, no, this is way more than just a slightly different spin or a slightly different emphasis. This ain't it. I was like, well, maybe we were wrong to leave Rome, so you guys take us back.
I saw your podcast with Margot, and you guys are talking about that. It's like, yeah, it turns out they just want to be progressive Christians. We're just gonna let all these Anglican fathers become essentially priest lights. Just let them keep their wives. So.
Yeah, more or less. Again, for those who don't know, there was a big movement during John Paul II's pontificate, where whole Anglican churches came over.
Shoot.
And of course they realized that there were a lot of practical considerations there. So on a very case-by-case basis, they said, yes, Anglican Father so-and-so, we're going to run you through some seminary and everything, but we can make some provision here, and we don't see any reason right now why you can't be ordained a Catholic priest, because one of the things that people often don't understand, and this includes Catholics, I'm afraid, priestly celibacy is not a doctrine. It's just a practice. It's a practice that I believe has served the church very well for several hundred years, but it is not something that could never change. It's not something that there can't be certain exceptions for. Like Eastern, there are different rites within Catholicism where me as a married man, I could become a priest if I were part of, say, the Ukrainian rite. It's not common, but it does happen. Now, if I became a Ukrainian rite priest and my wife died, I would not be allowed to remarry. But anyway, if you ever find a Catholic priest who's married, that's actually not, you're probably not talking to a heretic. You're probably talking to somebody who is actually legit.
I actually
It's just
hadn't.
very rare.
Yeah, it's actually something I never considered until now. It's like, what happens if you're married and you decide to become like? I guess that makes sense. You stay married. I mean, my writing partner over at the Cultural Review, she's I always tease her and say she's an agnostic Catholic because she's very interested in Catholicism, but she's not practicing. So, but she's read a lot about the history of it, and she's said basically that the celibacy the oath of celibacy was initially created specific for mostly a political reason, just because there were so many fathers at the time that were trying to essentially hand off their priesthood as a title of nobility, and the Catholic Church had to just cut the head off that really fast. Like,
That's certainly one reason. Yeah, to avoid any sort of to try to minimize any development of a priestly aristocracy. Now, as we know, that didn't completely work out. That worked out fine on a parish level, but bishops unfortunately wound up becoming basically aristocrats. Not hereditary aristocrats, but they became running with those circles. But there's a lot of historical reasons for that. A lot of it was the fact that when the Roman Empire fell, there was literally only one organization in existence that could possibly pick up the pieces and start rebuilding society, and that was the Catholic Church. And that's a big part of the reason why Catholicism got so mixed up and everything with the state in the first place, was the Catholic Church was the state, not necessarily through a desire to use the at least not initially, to use the means of the state and everything to spread or impose the faith. It was just, there's no one else to do this. We have to. And again, for a long time, it served Europe very well.
Yeah,
but as we know, various abuses developed and everything, and I'm certainly not one who thinks the Reformation happened in a vacuum.
Yeah, I mean, the first 1,000 years of the Catholic Church was essentially just the crazy uncles of civilization becoming priests and doing all sorts of insane things. I mean,
there's some truth. I disagree on some points there, but
I'm being hyperbolic, but we've all heard the crazy Pope stories. There's a lot of crazy Pope stories.
Yes. There are people who complain about Francis now. One, I do feel you, but he's
nowhere near as bad.
He is far from the worst we've ever had. In fact, that some of that came up on the last show that I did when we talked about how there was a Pope once who was literally running a brothel in Rome. Yeah.
Oh.
Yep. That's not exactly the best possible example of a leader of the faith, but it is what it is, and yeah.
I forget who said it, but I always joke that the great intellectual tradition of Protestantism is the ability to wash our hands of something and go away from it. But the thing about that someone I heard said that the thing about the Catholic Church is that because there's such a emphasis on it being the one church and the earthly embodiment of God's church, they get stuck with all the crazy family members, and they have to figure out what to do with them all, because they're just like, it's like, oh, we have a drunk uncle, we don't exactly know what to do with him, but we aren't just going to put him in a home, we just got to deal with it. So you get a lot of, that's where all the internal problems in the Catholic Church come from, is just that they don't just kick everything out. They don't wash their hands of it like my intellectual ancestors do. It's just like, yeah, they got to deal with it.
That, and the fact that we don't really have the option of getting a group of like-minded individuals who have whatever issue with whoever the priest is, and eventually decide, you know what, we're going to break off and go plant our own church over here. We can't do that and still call ourselves Catholic.
Yeah.
It forces, I think it forces you to deal with things a little bit more head on, at the very least. And yes, it does create certain uncomfortable conversations especially when you're trying to, when Catholic is at all trying to be evangelistic, because people are going to come with all the baggage. They're going to be, well, what about this and this and this and this? Stop pretending you Protestants don't have the same problems. The fact is, when you find them in a church, you just run away and start your own. and then that church probably dies and everything, but then this one develops the same issues, but they never get the press because it's within a relatively small group of people, as opposed to something that represents 1 billion people on the planet. It's easy to localize those things.
You're not going to see like high modernism metastasize within the Catholic Church, which is exactly the problem that happens in evangelical culture right now, where every single church is trying to be like a rock concert 24/7 with the lights and the fog machines. And I deal with that at my church, and I love my pastor to death. I will say it a million times in the road, but I hate the music. I hate that. I hate the rock and roll aspect of the church nowadays.
Fortunately, we haven't progressed past the odd place where you find somebody with a horrible voice on his acoustic guitar singing folk songs. You can find that from time to time, but fortunately, it's increasingly rare. There is a huge movement back towards a more traditional Catholicism, perhaps not within the higher echelons of the hierarchy, but down here amongst the rank and file and the parish priests. Yes, it's a huge movement back towards, frankly, towards our roots more than anything else. Kind of a rejection of some of the modernist progressive tendencies of, shall we say, the Democrat, the Catholics that vote for Democrats.
Yeah, or whatever the Boston wing of the party, whatever. All right, our PJ O'Rourke had a good point. Is that it's I like PJ O'Rourke's line on that. It's like the Catholics in Boston where they put something in the holy water that makes them vote Democrat, but
pretty much, yeah. Yeah, there's a huge movement away from that type of Catholicism, and if you want to know where the young Catholics are going, they're going to the traditional parishes.
Yeah, that's the thing about the young Catholics is one of those things that's like a good and bad for me, because I like the fact that there's especially among like the Zoomers, there's such a strong movement to go back to traditional churches but at the same time, it's really happening in conjunction with like the trad fash movements, like the Nick Fuentes Groyper types who just want to be like, we're like they understand that the Catholic Church is better than the Protestant Church at fostering society at a larger level, because Protestantism is essentially like a Fiddler on the Roof Amish situation where you go off on your own and you don't deal with the rest of society. But at the same time, the Catholics who want to join the especially the young ones who join the church now, who want the super far right stuff, they go really hard on it, and you end up like basically with like young, like far right young fascists who want to like just basically use the Catholic Church to just rebuild society from the ground up into a theocracy.
Yeah. The Fuentes types, fortunately, are rare, but you will find a lot of people who, I think, overly romanticize some of the past of the church. Like they'll forget that the church was already in bad shape before Vatican II, and they usually blame most of the problems of the modern Catholic Church on Vatican II, almost all of them, and not entirely without reason. But they kind of forget that the church was already in bad shape before Vatican II. Vatican II was called because the church was in bad shape. Vatican II wouldn't. The bad parts of Vatican II wouldn't have been able to do the damage they did if we weren't already in bad shape. We definitely needed to have our own. Even the Catholic Church periodically has to reform, and we needed that badly. And people forget that. They also, I think, overly romanticize one or two particular periods of church history in general. That's where you get Catholics that don't just prefer the Latin Mass, like Latin Mass only. I regard them very similar as I regard King James only Protestants, as though the King James Bible was literally, copies of it were handed out by Jesus on Mount Tabor. And it's like, you don't know who King James is yet, but trust me, you need this. the Latin Mass only Catholics are like, well, Mass should only ever be said in Latin. Well, the first Masses weren't said in Latin. They probably would have been said in a mixture of Hebrew and Greek. In fact, there's still a little bit of Greek preserved in the modern Mass.
And then you get the whole actually speech, and it just goes on forever because I remember, I forget what episode you were talking about it, but there's a propensity on both Catholic and Protestant circles to do what you're saying. It's just to fall in love with this version of the thing so deeply that you cannot function emotionally without it, and you're defending. And it's not that you can't defend it intellectually, but it's that you're clearly defending it emotionally and saying this is superior because it works for me, and it's because it's emotionally drawn to me, and it's clear that the arguments aren't just coming out of your intellectual faculties so much as it is about your emotional attachment to the thing.
Yeah, and I don't even mean to be overly hard on my more traditional fellow Catholics at all, because frankly, when it comes to the Latin Mass, I sympathize with you. I would be perfectly fine if the Pope woke up tomorrow and said Latin Mass only for everybody.
I never even been to one. I don't know what the deal is. So
it's like, be like, fine. I guess I'll have to learn the prayers and everything in Latin. No big deal. You know, I'll get there. But yeah. Put it this way. I sympathize with it. There's a lot of good reasons for it, but my issue is more the failure to recognize that it wasn't always this way.
Yeah.
Stop pretending that it was. It wasn't. There was no perfect fashion and everything. There's a lot of room for disagreement in various things, much more than you think. And again, priestly celibacy. It wasn't always a thing. I think it should stay a thing. I think it served us very well, but again, if the Pope woke up tomorrow and said, yep, that's not a requirement anymore, well, all right, I disagree, but okay. It's not like it's a doctrine, so here we are. I'll just have to deal with that.
Oh man, I can't imagine if Pope Francis is like, yeah, the priest can marry now. Okay, I hope no one has a problem with that.
It would be massive. It would be huge. The
dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
It would be very, very, very tumultuous for a while there, and
I'm surprised there wasn't more of a movement for that.
It would be a horrible idea, actually.
I'm surprised there wasn't more of a movement towards that after the abuse scandals back in 2001. Like, was there any sort of movement for that?
There was some talk, but everyone's like, especially once you crunch the numbers on the stats and how frequent it actually was, and also when most of it was happening. Most of it was happening kind of in the midst of the sexual revolution and the immediate pre- and post-Vatican II era, when there was just a lot of insanity going on in society and within the church. They're like, especially when you look at that, when you look at the numbers as it pertains now, it's actually really not that common. It's just you heard about literally every accusation.
Yeah, I mean, it was also clearly very politically advantageous at the time, as was evidenced by the fact that the same allegations came out, 4 years ago? And I think it was the Philadelphia parish, and it just got brushed completely under the rug because it's clear the media likes the new pope.
Well, that stuff that started coming out a few years ago did make a lot of waves for a little bit. But a lot of it, again, was actually just more details about the abuse that had already happened. Like, it was abuse that we already knew about it. We were just starting to find out the gory details.
It should say something that
they were awful and they were horrifying.
And of course, it gets filtered through the media mechanism, so that's not how it ends up getting sent out to the populace. So.
It winds up the impression is given that this is a whole new, fresh set of allegations, when actually, no, it was just, now we know the details, and oh my gosh, this was really terrible. Just look them up. It was all kinds of awful, and it'll probably make you sick to your stomach.
Yeah, I mean, I saw the Spotlight movie a couple years ago, and that's a tough watch, but
I'm sure I haven't watched it myself because, frankly,
It wasn't
not
as
sure
bad as
how.
you'd think. It was
Yeah.
actually pretty more. There was a lot of scenes where there were characters because everyone's Boston's ex-Catholic. It's kind of
Right.
the malaise of the
Yeah.
land. So there's kind of like a bit of an edge to it where it's like every single character there is like, man, these are people I used to know. So it was like it wasn't like a movie. It was taking. It felt like it was proud of what it was doing, but it definitely hearing all that, I'm like, it feels like they probably could have done a little more research.
But anyway, yeah, a lot of uncomfortable things in that one, to be sure.
Well, yeah, it's like I was saying. It's you get the Catholic Church gets stuck with all the bad relatives because they can't kick them out. It's if
You
you
know, about the same time as when the first abuse allegations and everything started to come out, there was Congress had commissioned a study on the public school system. That study was quickly shut down when the early findings were that, yeah, this is probably about 100 times worse than it is in the Catholic Church.
yeah, I've heard that. I mean, I've also heard that the rates are actually technically higher in Protestant churches than currently in Catholic churches, which I don't know what the actual like numbers are, like raw numbers are in terms of like what your statistical chances are of walking into a church and that happening to you,
Right,
but
right.
I it doesn't surprise me though, just because Protestant church is so disassociative. It doesn't you wouldn't know. But I mean, obviously out near me in Chicago, we just had the Willow Creek scandal like 2 years ago, and that
I don't
was
know.
Did you hear about that?
It rings a vague bell, but
I don't have the full details on it, but essentially, like the pastor was pulling all sorts of crap, and the entire elder board was forced to resign. Like it was that bad. Like,
okay.
and then obviously just this past year we had the Ravi Zacharias thing, where it turned out like one of the most popular Protestant pastors in the country was secretly sexting people behind the scenes, and almost no one knew about it until they started going into his like phone and finding all this stuff. And now his own ministry is like, holy crap, we didn't know about this. So
I didn't. I had heard rumblings of it a few weeks ago, but I didn't know what they were talking about.
yeah, I mean
Okay, wow, that's cool.
I mean not it's,
'Cause, yeah, I know he was big in Protestant circles.
yeah, and that's messed up, and that messed up a lot of people because he's one of those Protestant speakers like Billy Graham Light, who a lot of people they hear him and suddenly it all clicks for him. So now it's like, oh my gosh, the guy that convinced me was sexting teenagers. What the heck am I supposed to do with that? Like that's
Yeah, and wow, that's
well, I don't know actually. I don't know if they were teenagers or young adults, but it was bad either way.
way. It's clearly inappropriate.
Yeah, extramarital affair, deeply inappropriate power relationships, and all that jazz. But
Exactly, all that jazz, and that's one thing I think in the Protestant world, the abuse is a little bit different. It seems, at least from what I know, less the little boys thing and more even in the Catholic Church, that actually wasn't the biggest thing. It was usually it was often homosexual. Like the biggest chunk of it was homosexual relationships between priests and like kind of teen and young teen boys that was by far the single biggest thing. So yeah, that's fun. Of course, the fact that it was homosexual, they swept that under the rug because that was politically incorrect to bring that up.
I'm sure
we can't.
I'm sure that would have been useful for the media just to kind of point out the hypocrisy of that, but
Yeah, but they also wanted to bash the church as being abusive, so they couldn't characterize homosexual relationships as abusive. So therefore, they just ignored they just downplayed the fact that it was homosexual.
I see what you mean. Yeah.
Any idiot could look at the numbers and everything and make that conclusion, but you weren't allowed to say it.
No one reads the numbers. They just read the title and then they like brisk through the article. That's the
Exactly.
because the truth is always buried at the bottom of the article. That's where you got to check.
Yeah, exactly. You got to get past the first couple of paragraphs at least before I actually get to anything worth reading.
Exactly. Well, I don't have much else to add at the moment. Do you want to just wrap it for tonight, or do you have anything else you want to talk about real quick?
Gosh, there's never anything just real quick.
I mean, we could go off about this forever, but it's late for you are, and it's getting late where I am. So it's one of those things. Where I don't want to twirl plates for the next 3 hours and.
No, we can definitely leave it right there, Tyler.
I would love to pick up and talk about this again sometime, but it's.
Oh, absolutely.
But yeah, anything you want to just plug your stuff real quick and tell people where to find you?
Oh, yeah. You can definitely find me doing my own podcast at Fighting Void on Twitter, and also I'm Gingerman Editor on Twitter. This is just my personal account where I opine on whatever is pissing me off at the moment, which lately is a lot.
Really, I had no idea. I couldn't. What's going on lately? I don't know.
Just some of this.
I'm Protestant. I'm Protestant. I live under a rock. I don't know what happens outside my house.
But yeah, we do live streams every Saturday at 9 p.m. Eastern with interviews of all kinds of random people, much like it seems like you probably do. And also you can find us at the website, which just search. Well, you know what? Don't search it. Go to one of my Twitter things and you'll find the link there, because you won't find it just through a search. And there we post, of course, the shows, the occasional article, and also a few other affiliated shows like Pastor G and Blunt Talk, and a couple others that are in the works.
All right, cool. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
No, thanks, Tyler. I'm glad we were able to get it together and make it work.
Sure thing. It's good to meet you officially, too. So.
Yep, same here.
Have a good night.
Yep, you too.
The AntiSocial Network is a Groupthink Productions podcast. Editing, producing, and hosting are by Tyler Hummel, artwork by Crystal Cowley, and original music was composed by Melissa Lafira and the late Dan Smolla. Like, subscribe, and please let us know what you think about the show in the comments below if you'd like to see anyone interesting be a guest on the show. Thank you for listening.